We'll call the special city council meeting of April 25th, 2022 to order, and I'll ask the roll call from Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craighead?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Garrickson Gall?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Honorick?
Here.
All present this evening. First on the agenda is public comment. I don't see anybody here from the public to participate, so we'll move on to regular business, which is the business state of the special meeting notice. We have one item this evening. D1 is the landscape redesign in the Troy Downtown Development Authority TDDA District April 2022 update. And I will turn it over to Mark to introduce and.
Yep. Yeah, I'll do a very short introduction. Did everyone have an opportunity to meet Mark Adams, council member? So Mark, the response. This is Mark Adams, our new economic development manager, and so our goal is to transfer the day-to-day operations of the DDA to Mark, including the other TIF districts. So it's funny though, because I've seen this presentation so many times I can't wait until it's over. But
You're gonna love it. Yeah.
So what you'll realize, or what you'll come to understand, is that landscape material has a useful life and is really getting to the end of the life within 10 years. Also, they get damaged, run over, and actually we have a lot of resources in the ground out there, and this presentation actually has a lot of information. This project is actually moving along ahead of schedule. Kurt Bovenseep is the day-to-day project manager on this. Dennis Trantham is definitely involved. And Chris Riggert, he will make the presentation, and then Rhett Gronvelt, a principal from OHM Advisors, is here, and he just sort of observes and makes a few comments here and there. I really don't have much more to say except for to turn it over to Chris. Why don't you come up and make your presentation?
Before you turn it over to Chris, if I can just say a couple things. I think it'd be best for our purposes to let Chris do the whole presentation if possible first. Because probably questions will get answered during. I think that's a good way of doing it. And then from the other perspective, what's expected of us tonight, we're not here to pick flowers or design materials or anything. That's not our job. But city management's looking for just confirm that we're on the right track here. DDA's already given their consensus to say, yes, this looks great. But we're kind of the last stopgap to say, hey, wait a minute, we're missing something.
Can you comment really quick about the committee we have?
Sure.
Our little group.
Yeah, so there's the steering committee, I guess. Alan Kerr, like the chair of the DDA, is on there. I'm on there representing council, and my role is the vice chair on the DDA. Mark and Kurt and Dennis and Bill and Chris and Rhett and Brent. So everyone here, we've been meeting regularly, going through a lot of process, and the presentation we'll talk about a little bit, but don't think that we're here. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's gone into it at this point, basically. A lot of community engagement from stakeholders, a lot of
inventory,
data gathering. So we're very far along in the process, but Mark thought it was important to have council have some input here to kind of just touch base and see where everything's at, because obviously we're the ones that end up interfacing with the public a lot when things like this happen. Like I said, it's kind of a last chance. If we see something that's really missing or they're going in the wrong direction, which I'm very confident that we're not, based on everything that's happened, but now's our chance.
I'm going to anticipate one question. The question is regarding budgets.
Yeah.
So we have not designed anything yet. So the DDA is recommending a budget which includes only funding to continue with this inventory and design. The funding is probably going to mandate that we do this through phasing, and there's a couple reasons why we'll have to do phasing, and we're going to work with Rob to have a plan of how we're going to fund the improvements once we design the improvements. We're not even there yet. With that, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening. Like Mark said, my name is Chris Riggert. I'm a project manager and landscape architect with OHM Advisors. If you're unfamiliar with OHM, we're a full-service planning, design, and engineering firm with offices in 5 states and over 600 employees. We have a whole host of professions in-house, so like I said, we are full service. And the reason I say that is because as we approach a project like this, as a landscape architect, of course, I love to put trees in the ground. But it's also important to bring a variety of perspectives so that we know that this works not just from a design perspective, but also from a variety of engineering perspectives. So, like I said, I'm really pleased to be here and to share the updates that we have. If I'm succinct, this should be about a 20-minute presentation. I'll present to you the overview for anyone who may not be familiar with the project and what we're doing, and then walk through the phases of work that we've completed, share with you some of the progress we've made, some of the findings we found along the way, and then have plenty of time left over for discussion. Like the mayor said, I think at this point we'd welcome any comment that the council would like to share with us. But at this point in the process, we want to make sure we're just heading in the right direction and that our bearing is right. And so if there are things that the council sees that requires adjustment or things, that's really what we're here to hear about. So to start, if you haven't memorized the limits of the Dda boundary, here they are. Big Beaver runs through the middle with the interchange in the center. The Big Beaver stretches for just over 3.5 miles within the DDA, which runs from around Golfview Drive past Coolidge to the east, just past the Rochester intersection. We set out on this project with city staff and with the DDA because of a number of items that are starting to show their age. A lot of the elements that are in the median right now and along the corridor were installed about 30 years ago now. That includes the hardscape, that includes the landscape material. Kurt and his team have been working hard over the past few years to protect the landscape that's out there now, because it has been observed that there's a number of pests. So that's, the landscape for 30 years in this type of environment is pretty good for the evergreens and deciduous trees that we have out there. But we can also observe that some of the decorative crosswalks and the pavers are settling in some locations. And so it really is a timely time to look at what is the next chapter for the design of this corridor and what does that entail. I should say that our focus is really on the back of curb, so we're not really contemplating any traffic changes. We are also the traffic engineers for the city, so we're observing the impacts that these recommendations will have on traffic. And so it's the median and then back of curb to the sidewalks is really where our focus areas are, and within the limits of the DDA within that yellow boundary. Within our process, we kicked this off in January, and we've been doing quite a bit of assessment and data gathering in the corridor, and now we're moving into development of the individual projects and what our approach is for the design. And I'm just going to walk through each one of these phases and what we accomplished within each one. Within the launch phase, we met as a team. We continue to meet on a bi-weekly basis. And one of the first things we did is to establish what are the drivers for this project and what do we need to achieve at the end, so we can have that in mind as we proceed through this process. And we came up with 8 of them. I'll read them to you here. The first is that this project needs to be a high impact, that we're prioritizing cohesion across the 3.5 miles and not concentrating in small pockets that aren't connected. It needs to be timeless. The expenditure here, like Mark said, may be significant, and so we want to make sure that whatever is put in the ground here doesn't look dated in 10 years, that it'll look good regardless of the time that you're viewing it. Enjoyable is really important, and this is actually something that was championed by Alan Kiriluk, that this needs to be a place that people want to come and spend time because it's enriching, it's comfortable, and it's enjoyable. Balanced, this specifically refers to making sure that what we do with the landscaping is working for and not against the businesses that exist. So a perfect example would be where we place a tree. We want to make sure that that's not in front of somebody's signage, and that we can locate that in a way that we can still see signage, but we can also get the benefits of having street trees and greenery. Adaptability, this is the idea that the landscape can be the canvas for a lot of placemaking and civic opportunities through the corridor. So that's things like, we could look at banners and lighting, and so a great example is the trees on the evergreens every winter. We've heard from a number of folks how much that's appreciated in the community. We want to expand those opportunities so that we can continue to do those types of things, and hopefully outside of just the Christmas season, but year-round. Safety is paramount, whether it's just the physical safety that you're safe, but also the perception of safety and comfort, regardless of whether you're driving or whether you're walking or if you're biking. All those modes should have a level of safety here in the corridor. Unique, this really needs to belong here in Troy. It needs to belong along Big Beaver. And so our design process really prioritizes making sure that this is in place here. And coordinated, even though we're working within the yellow limits that I showed you of the DDA, there may be the possibility that some of the design motifs and strategies we develop may want to extend outside the DDA. And so we don't want to look like this just ends, but that there's the ability to integrate into the larger Troy community. We looked at a number of the previous plans, or we looked at the previous plans, which there are a number, I should say. So starting with the Big Beaver Corridor Study in 2006, which provides a really great framework for a lot of what's happened over the past 15 years. The Trails and Pathways Master Plan, the City Master Plan, the Move Across Troy Plan, all of these have elements of them that are consistent throughout them. So the focus on social spaces, creating engaging public spaces, focusing on Big Beaver as an element, development of social nodes. This is language from these reports that we've pulled forward. Safety and mobility, so using a complete streets approach, looking at mobility as a strategy, mid-block crossings, a walkability toolbox, and then environmental responsibility, sustainable development, and stormwater management. These are all elements that are within each of these reports that we pulled forward, because as we move forward, it's really important that we build from the hard work that the city's done. And I think this shows a level of consistency in that approach too. So we want to carry that consistency through our approach and continue to build on the hard work that the city's invested in. So the assessment phase, walk through a couple of components here. If you've been along the corridor and you saw some people invest, collecting information, those are your friendly OHM neighborhood field staff out there collecting information on the trees. They have collected over 1,000 trees at this point, over 2 acres of hardscape, and over 3 acres of landscape beds. So they've been busy out there collecting everything that the DDA owns, and for our consideration. This is an image that's from our online viewer, so it's just kind of a screenshot. But every single tree we have geolocated, and we have a variety of, a whole list of information associated with it, including a photo, which we will use as part of our design process, but is also something we will hand over to the city at the end of this, so the city can continue to track the landscape, and hopefully, we can continue to build on that with the new improvements. So we have an evolving layer of real-time information for the landscape that's out there. Of what we found here, here's some tabulations. The hardscape, we've got over an acre of the decorative pavers that are at the corners. We've got about half an acre of the decorative, concrete and decorative applications. And from our assessment, really only about 2% of that is failing and needs immediate attention. And those are typically at the crosswalks where a curb ramp comes down to road grade. Those are really important and things that we'll focus on moving forward. But over 30 years, some of these elements have just settled and need a little bit of attention. So that composes about 2/3 of the pavers out there need probably to be reset because there are tripping hazards and things like that. Within the landscape, like I said, over 1,000 trees, 175 of those are evergreen, 864 of those are deciduous. And from what our arborist has found from the assessment is that right now, probably 1 in 4 trees needs to be removed, either because it is invasive, and over the 30 years since it's been planted, it's not an appropriate species any longer, either because the tree is degraded to the point or declined to the point it needs to be removed, or because the landscape has grown to the level of maturity that by removing one tree, it will allow another group of trees to succeed. So that is right today, our arborist would recommend that probably 1 in 4 of those trees should come out. In addition to that, and don't shoot the messenger here, the evergreen trees, like I said, Kurt's been treating those for a pest called pitch mask borer. It's very common. Of the 175 trees that we surveyed, 175 of them have pitch mask borer. Every single one of them does, and so our arborist, his assessment is, with the continued care that the city's been exercising, there's probably another 10 years maybe left in those trees before they're going to decline to the point that they need to be, they'll visibly be something that you want removed. And that includes removals of certain trees and maintenance over the next 10 years. And in addition, the maples, which are between the back curb and sidewalk on the west side of the highway, are exhibiting a fair amount of frost cracking. Those two probably have about 10 years left in them. So that number is not contemplated necessarily in this removal number. So the 1 in 4 is now because of, how we want the landscape to function over the next 10 years. And then when the full brunt of the evergreen and those maples come down, that's in addition to those 1 in 4. So there is some work to be done out there. And I think the perspective that we take is where we put trees now are going to affect and influence behaviors in the corridor for the next 30 to 50 years. And so where we put those trees is really important. And so we're approaching it from that mindset. If we were to tabulate up all the assets we've gathered at this point, we just asked the question, what would it look like if we were to rebuild the landscaping and the placemaking elements that are out there in today's dollars? If we were to hand something to a contractor and say, go build this, what does it cost? This is a high level number, but our estimate would be probably around $10.8 million. That includes the double masted light poles that are out there. It includes the full treatment of landscape, including the irrigation system, includes the hardscape. And one thing to note here would be that the trees that we'd be putting back for this dollar value would be larger trees in efforts to try to get closer to a more mature landscape. However, we can't purchase the level of trees that are out there now. They just can't be replaced, given that they've had 30 years in situ to be able to grow to that size. So there are some things that aren't included in this number, but just for our purposes, to sort of calibrate what future improvements may look like and what dollar values may look like Mark said, we're not totally there yet, but this is at least a starting point for us to understand what's out there now and where we go from there. So our team's been looking at the physical assessment and conditions. We've also been looking at the perception of the corridor and tapped into what is the look and feel and what do people say to their friends and neighbors when they leave Big Beaver? What's the impression that's in their mind? And so we've looked at a number of the elements, looking at where trees are located, how they're grouped, and how that plays into what people see as they drive through here. So elements like the overpass being an icon and a wayfinding element, the fact that the street trees between the sidewalk and the back of curb do a lot to provide a more pedestrian comfort. These are the types of things we're queuing into so that we can observe what's out there now and pull that forward. We've also been talking to a number of stakeholders. We've met with the Troy Chamber twice. We've presented to the City Planning Commission to receive their feedback. We had an online survey, and then we've met one-on-one with a number of private property owners and business owners in the corridor, including Kirko, Bostic Group, Chuck Whittle, both of the Frankels, the Forbes Company. And in those conversations, we've heard a lot of really interesting things. I've synthesized this here, and what I'll say is that this graphic here is from a platform that we use that allows people, when we meet in large groups, to respond in real time with their cell phones. So we can see what people's thoughts are in real time. And the reason I say that is because Somerset Mall is misspelled, and that was somebody typing on their cell phone. What we've heard so this is just a snippet from that presentation. What we've heard is that in regards to the goals and objectives that we've set, safety, high impact, timelessness were among some of the top goals. That people, when they think of the corridor now, the dominant impressions are of traffic, congestion, busyness, but also a destination for shopping and employment. We asked the question, what's working well? And we heard that people appreciate the landscape on the west side, which is a different character than what's on the east side. But the west side, folks liked around the Somerset collection. There's just a level of maintenance to that I think people felt looked upscale and looked favorable. We also learned that there's a really strong connection to the trees that are in the median. All the trees I just told you are going to have to be removed. So we're going to have to think critically about how we phase this over time. That's a good nugget that we need to keep in mind as we design our improvements. What needs attention? We asked that question as well. Like I said, the east side of 75 doesn't have the same appeal of the west side. They're just different landscaping schemes, and I think the placement of some landscaping on the west side lends itself to more people liking it than the east side. The DDI was also a major topic of conversation. That's the diverging diamond interchange, which I'm sure you guys have heard plenty about. It's Spartan, to say the least. I mean, there's not much landscaping there, and so there were a variety of opinions about the DDI itself, but I think there was wide recognition that it's a great opportunity. It's a broad landscape for us to be able to take themes from the corridor landscaping and put that maybe into the interchange. And then lastly, it was generally seen, the corridor was generally seen as not friendly to pedestrians, but at the same time, people were saying they feel like it should be, that it's appropriate that somebody should feel comfortable walking down the street, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Here's another graphic that that same group, the chamber group, ranked our goals here. And to drill in on some of those key points, landscape character, people were desired a landscape that's welcoming and comfortable, like I said, enjoyable. There were a variety of perspectives, those that felt it should be bold and vibrant, and others that felt it should be a little more refined and elegant. So that's our job, is to strike the balance between those. We covered the DDI, that there were some specific pedestrian safety concerns that our team is looking into to see if there are opportunities to improve safety. And then from the pedestrian comfort standpoint, there's a general perception that it's not safe to walk along Big Beaver, which is an interesting point because we did review the traffic data and didn't see anything to suggest that that's actually the case. There's not any higher than average vehicle to pedestrian conflicts, but it was a wide held opinion that it's not a safe place to walk. And so there is a desire for increased comfort through buffering with the landscape, through creating seating areas, through utilizing signage and landscape to enrich the corridor from a pedestrian standpoint. And lastly, there was a request. I mean, a number of folks said, man, we wish it was easier to cross Big Beaver because we feel like Frogger when we have to go from north to south or vice versa. So if we move forward to the development of our approach and what this looks and feels like, we took all that information and worked it through with the team and then developed here an overall strategy that will inform us as we move forward. And so we've got it here in a couple different formats. This is an overall diagram, high level, conceptual, to illustrate some of those components. And you can see that, here we go. The line that runs right down Big Beaver, you can see it changes colors, but it runs pretty consistently from east to west. Really the intent here is, Big Beaver is where the landscaping and placemaking elements should occur, and they may change and evolve throughout the corridor, but there is still a level of consistency. And we can articulate the landscape with specific focus areas, which you can see with some of these little feathered out bubbles. We're using that on roughly about a quarter of a mile increment to help to start to break down the scale of the corridor so it doesn't feel quite as massive. And we're also looking at the secondary approaches, the mile roads. Can those have a landscape treatment that starts to feed into the larger overall Big Beaver corridor? And then, like I said, the DDI is really kind of the center of all of this and something that we can take advantage of. What's really unique about this is, to get off of the highway and into this corridor, you're not getting dumped at the the end of the district like you would in some areas. You're actually getting dumped into the heart of the DDA. And so that's really kind of a unique condition and something that we want to capitalize on. These are some notes that fill out how we would approach some of these. Performing initial maintenance and removals is important. Utilizing an integrated and successional planting approach rather than clean cutting everything. So that's to say, rather than come through and clear everything out and plant new smaller trees, can we plant something next to another patch of trees so that they grow up? And in 10 years, when we do have to remove those trees, we've got a new landscape that's been established in the ground for over a decade. We really feel like there's a big opportunity here for activation in the wintertime, but that comes with making sure that there's proper maintenance and we can maintain the trees that are out there. I think I've covered most of these other elements. The entries are really important to defining the limits of the DDA, and then using the landscape as we can to accommodate pedestrian comfort, so it's more comfortable for people to traverse the corridor. So, what does this look and feel like? And this is what we wanted to convey to you here is, these images, this thought process is high level, it's conceptual, but it's going to trickle down, it's going to inform how we design everything. So I asked the question earlier, when we talk to people, what is their impression when they left the corridor? What do they think of? Well, this is what we want them to be thinking of. We want them to think this is a refined, elegant, and enriching space a place that is comfortable and attractive, maybe even more of an oasis. It's got elements of the natural landscape. It's also got a lot of greenery and lushness to it. And we want to channel the refinement and consistency of the landscape that we heard that people liked, but at the same time utilizing inspiration from the natural Michigan landscape and combining those two into a design scheme that's really unique to this corridor. So we've got some Preston imagery here to sort of jog that. Our inspiration here is the Michigan landscape. I mean, I think that's something that's really important. You know, this is a multi-regional destination. People drive from Canada, they drive from Ohio, they drive from far-flung Michigan to come here and shop at the corridor or shop at the Somerset collection. And so it's important that as people get off the highway here that they feel like this is reflective of an experience that's maybe a Michigan experience and a Troy experience. So we're looking at combinations of evergreens and deciduous, looking at the winter landscape, you know, really important that this looks good in the middle of winter and it doesn't just work during the few months of summer that we have left. I put on here the new license plate for the state because I think what's interesting is at the bottom of this it says Water Winter Wonderland. So every license plate in the state is going to say that. If this is a landscape that wants to speak in part for Michigan, you know, can we capitalize on that within the design and treatment of the corridor? At the same time, on the flip side of the coin, you know, we've talked about natural. This is really more of the refined. These are some of the things we've talked about as a team that may not necessarily be the look and feel, but have elements of things that we like. So, you know, the Magnificent Mag Mile in Chicago is a great example of landscape that's a little more low profile, but also beautiful. This is an image from Millennia in Florida, which is where the Somerset collection owns another mall. And while this isn't the aesthetic we're looking for here, we're not necessarily looking for palm trees and these types of plants, but I think what the team did like is the level of maintenance and care and craft that comes across in that treatment. And lastly, trees. You know, as a landscape architect, I love trees, but your community also loves trees, and it's important that we find a way to build a mature landscape, because that really is, I think, a calling card for the look and feel is the maturity that you manage to achieve. So the elements, again, these are elements that inspire us, and we may take elements of them, but this is not, we're not literally proposing to install this, but it's practice for us to kind of get inspired and collectively talk about what we like. And so what the team was drawn to is this level of consistency. Formal plantings, capitalizing on texture and color, you know, and maybe including some type of decorative element, stone element that accentuates the landscape, maybe could even protect elements of the landscape. But doing so in a way that reflects the natural landscape. So we've got the consistency element, excuse me, but maybe the stone is a little more unrefined. Maybe we've got dry creek beds or stormwater management areas that are advancing today at sustainability. We're looking at plant material that's at home in Michigan and will thrive in this location. And we're using the landscape in a way that hits home texture, color, and variety, and makes this a vibrant and interesting experience. So looking at, you know, bulbs in the spring of a variety of colors, maybe some unique hedge elements, maybe even using stone as a ground cover in a really unique way, and then using color to really drive home some drama and vibrancy in the corridor. And then lastly, like we said, where we can enhance pedestrian comfort, we want to do so. And so we're looking at things like buffering from, using landscape to buffer the street from the outdoor spaces that exist now, creating seating pockets, and maybe accentuating some of the paving elements to hit home the idea that this is a higher craft space for pedestrians. So that is where we're at. I went 10 minutes over, so you're right, Mike.
We took like 5 minutes in the beginning, so it's not all you. You're okay, you're okay.
So I would love to entertain some discussion from folks. Like we said, the focus is really, is there anything in here that's taking a left turn and going the wrong direction? And are there other considerations that you'd like to share?
All right, well, thanks, Chris. It's a very thoughtful presentation and process so far. I'll start with that, even though I've seen it before. But I really am appreciative of the look at the historical documents you use. I mean, we talk about these plans and reports that the city's done over the years, and the question always was, do they just sit on a shelf somewhere? It's nice to know they were pulled off the shelf and used as part of this planning process. And also the data gathering and the community stakeholder engagement, I think has been, I've witnessed it firsthand, but truly it's been some of the best I think the city's done in a while, and it's nice to see it happening in this process. One other thing I wanted to add, you were talking about, it just dawned on me, we've talked about it before, but before I open it up to everybody else, you talked about people driving into Michigan, and you said shopping at Somerset. They come for a lot more reasons, obviously, but for a lot of people, the first time they really see Michigan outside of a car is they've flown into Metro and they got on the freeway and they get off at Big Beaver, right? So for some people traveling internationally, or I mean, this is what their first impression of Michigan is, and so I think we have that unique opportunity to blend in some of the Michigan elements specifically you talked about. I just wanted to add this. I think it's an important part. But so I think we'll do what we normally do and kind of go around, and reminder that the goal is to say yes, city management, where it looks like you're heading in the right direction. We appreciate, and so I mean, let's try to have that go on if we can. But and then do you mind starting?
Sure.
Okay.
So I really do like the direction that this is going in. One of the things that I really appreciate is that you're taking into consideration the DDA doesn't exist in the, under a microscope. It's surrounded by other areas, and to get some level of continuity even outside the DDA, so it doesn't look like you've gone to a different city or gone to a different place is really important, because we do hear a lot of comments, particularly as you get closer to Rochester and hit the east side of the city, of why does Big Beaver look the way it does? And you can always have a conversation with residents about, well, the DDA and it's its own taxing authority, and you can have that conversation, but the reality is that, that when it looks so starkly different, it prompts that conversation more often. But if you can get that continuity or some elements of it, and you're already thinking about that, is wonderful, and I'm really glad to hear that. You made a point of saying you want the experience to be enjoyable for pedestrians. And Alan's mentioned this before, this is not a new thing. And I tend to agree with that philosophy. Without getting into too much of a design conversation, what elements, or what do we have a lot of options to make it enjoyable when you're on a very large road that's noisy, exhaust, maybe angry drivers because they're stuck in traffic.
Right.
Are there a lot of options of what can be done to, despite all of that, make it an enjoyable experience for those that may be outside their vehicles?
Sure. You're asking the hard questions, but it's a good one. And the answer is, I guess what I'll say is, we at the end of this project to set expectations. I don't think we're going to go through this project and at the end, it's going to be something where everyone says, wow, this is the best place in Metro Detroit, the most comfortable place to walk. I mean, I think there's just some realities of being along Big Beaver that we have to realize. I think we can take significant steps to go that way. And there are people that actually do walk the corridor now. And we did walk the corridor. And what I will say is that I think you make assumptions being a driver, but then when you walk, it is a little bit of a different experience. So I think there's improvements to be made, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think there are things like buffering that will help dampen some of the noise. I think there's elements like lighting, which will help make it feel more comfortable. I think one of the things is there's just not a lot of cues right now to suggest that it is a comfortable space for someone to walk down. And a story I'll share, and some of these folks have heard this story before, so I apologize. But there's somebody that I work with. She sits behind me. She's been sort of observing the progress, and she lives in Berkeley and comes and shops here. And has said, I just don't think there's any way. I'm really interested where you're going to go, because it's just not safe to walk on Big Beaver. And that's why I said, well, I'm going to challenge that a little bit, because we know the data says that's just not the case. And I think one of the elements that leads people to that assumption just is the fact that there aren't a ton of walkers, and there isn't anything out there that suggests other than a sidewalk. There's some plazas that are popping up in front of businesses, which definitely help. But I think through this project, we can maybe put some things in the ground that'll help suggest, like, this is a place that people should feel safe walking. And by having more people, it's going to, just by nature, get more comfortable. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to say I think there are definitely significant strides we can take as part of the project. I don't think we'll fully solve that issue.
All right, no, good answer to a hard question. And then the last question, just so I'm not dominating. There's been references to this being a phased approach. Like, over what period of time do you anticipate, from whenever the work starts to when it might end? Is it 2 years, 10 years, something in between?
I think Mark's going to jump in here.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely like 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
Just for us to build up enough money to be able to pay for things, that's the reason why. And then I think that this isn't a discussion for council to say, let's spend general fund dollars, but I think council eventually at some point in time is going to have to deal with what we're starting to call the bookends. And then, of course, Ellen's talks about other places too, but whether we want to carry some of these things, one for consistency along Big Beaver, and then maybe carry some of the strategies or techniques to some other areas of the city,
Yep.
which may require funding that's not DDA funding. And another reason why it has to be phased is the DDA just doesn't have all the money up front. It's going to take a few years to build it up. I think we have approximately, at the end of the 3-year budget, we'll have a $6 million fund balance, as an example. And then every year we get about $1 million of revenue. And then the DDA sunsets in 2033.
Not that long.
Mark, did you say at the beginning, I can't remember, I apologize, that Rob is going to start building out budget?
Yeah,
He did-
yeah,
you
a budget
did say that?
strategy.
A budget strategy, right, that's the, okay.
Right, right, which deals with, as we build up the fund balance and then future revenues that has been freed up because when Somerset or the Forbes companies gave us the $4 million, give is the wrong word.
Paid.
They owed us our $4 million. We applied approximately $3.1 million to write down the debt, and put the rest in fund balance, which then freed up approximately, give or take, almost $1 million a year in revenues that we didn't have before. Now, we always have to remember, the DDA's TIF money, number one, is to service that bond debt. That's the most important thing. But I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I think we're in pretty good shape. From me, off the top of my head, I think there's only about $7 million worth of debt left over until the end of 2033.
And also, Alan is extremely focused on trying to find money other places, whether that's MEDC or other, there's a lot of opportunities, and he's really dialed into all of that.
Well, let me tell you, Alan will be calling me at 8:01 tomorrow morning to find out what happened.
Right. So we can't count on other money, but Alan's really focused on it, and he's connected to the right people in part of that process, so that'll help hopefully. Are you
I'm all
good
set.
for now? Ellen?
Great questions. My one comment is I love the idea of looking at embracing that we are a four-season entity. Let's proceed accordingly. The stone design elements, those are simple things, I think, that we could carry over into the other corners of the community that Mark alluded to. I'm always saying to him, we have to take care of Rochester Road. We have to take care of, we can't afford to do it all at this huge scale, but there's a character and a theme that's going to develop here that some of those elements could hopefully be comprehended in other boulevards and other corners of the community. And we might be able to find some community partners that might help us do that. So while I know what we contracted OHM for is this piece, I'm hearing you that it sounds like you are thinking about beyond just the Big Beaver corridor, so that it's complementary. it's kind of like when you redo your house and you know, in our case, it was our kitchen and we knocked out a wall. We gotta do some things in the other places or there will be such a disconnect. You have to plan for that so that your house has consistency. I feel like Troy's our house. How do we make sure we have that consistency with the placemaking here key? I've walked and biked. It is walkable and bikeable on Big Beaver. Can we enhance it? Can we make it better? Yes. Are there big cities that have huge wide roads that are fun to walk and bike and tour that have places? Yes. But it's going to be a challenge. Directionally, I think what you're talking about gets us there in my experience. The feedback you had on trees, I want to affirm, you know, like there's nothing in the data finding stakeholder discussion that surprises me at all. It's absolutely consistent with what I've heard over the years as a council person. So I can affirm a lot of that in terms of don't take down all the trees at once, or as we evolve this, that will resonate well with, I think, our residents if we evolve carefully. I don't really have questions. Don't forget the east side. The idea of extending appeals to me. I love what you've done. And conceptually, I'm right with you, and I think you are on track with what our residents would think too.
Thank you very much.
Teresa?
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really thoughtful and good and enlightening, because we had this discussion, I don't know, 2020 maybe? And so it's really good to kind of see what has transpired since then. And so definitely some of my thoughts when I was watching the presentation was, I agree with the safety, because you don't think of Big Beaver as so much of a walkable area. And so I do think that buffering is probably one of the biggest things, and I think trees help to really provide a good natural barrier, both for sound and just the look, and kind of provides a little bit of maybe, you don't feel like you're just kind of out there walking and everyone's driving by looking at you, you know, maybe a little bit of anonymity or something, I don't know, or cover, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you know, so I think that's really important. So I definitely think the trees are huge. When you put the $10.8 million, does that include basically replacing all the trees that you said need to be replaced, like the?
That would include starting from ground up. So it would be, of the 1,039 trees that we had, it would be costing out 1,039 trees.
Like all of them, okay.
And it's really just a, you know, I will say the market right now is kind of wild. So that number could, you know, could do this, but it's kind of a positioning tool just to understand what you guys own out there now, what the DDA owns now.
Okay.
Yeah, but it also included like $2 million for the lighting, but it's already there. We won't need to replace it.
Okay.
Right.
And
Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on it, because we vacillated whether or not, and we thought it was important to show council and the DDA the true investment that's been made over the last several years of what we've put into the DDA and the significance of that, and that we've done our best to maintain it, but as City Manager Miller stated in the beginning, it's reached its end of its useful life. But the intent of that 10.8 is not to say, you know, we need that now. It's just to show the level of investment that we've made in the corridor over this past 20, 30 years.
and that kind of brings me to my next question. Do we anticipate any barriers or any potential problems due to getting materials or with inflation or
Yes.
Okay.
There's lots of unknowns, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, you could talk about getting landscape materials, is that difficult?
It is, and we've seen the landscape prices have generally, during COVID, they've doubled. So it's, yes, there probably will be issues, and so I think, you know, it may be strategic for us to try to pin some of this stuff down early, because there are folks that will grow, you know, what you need, so we'll have to be strategic.
And then one other question. How long does it take to develop like a mature landscape? how many years? Like, is it decade? Like, I know you
Depends
said
on
this
the
has been 30
species.
years, but.
And it depends on the landscape itself. You know, I think you can see the landscape that's out there now is 30 years. And so I think we could look at if there's a desire for more impact sooner. If that's kind of in your question, I think there's strategies we can look at that from a species standpoint, but also a size standpoint. So I think if you're asking me how long will it take to get a mature landscape back, you know, I think 20 years is probably it.
I think a good way to look at the negative side of that is look at what MDOT did in the DDI. I don't think that will ever see mature, what they put in there.
Right. Yeah.
20 years? I mean, 20 years until it's like solid, but I mean, but then it's good for another 10 and then you have to replace it again. I mean, I don't think that's, I mean, right? I mean, some of the species, I think you have a fairly mature looking landscape after 10, 12 years, right? I
Sure.
mean, it's not necessarily as stately, but
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're not, I mean, 20 years is a long time from now.
It's a long time, yeah, and so we'll need to prioritize impact and look at species. And then, go ahead.
And I just, remember, this is going to be a phased approach. So we're not going to go in and remove all the mature landscaping. We're going to selectively remove some and replenish with an immature landscape that has an opportunity to grow and replace then once we have to remove that remaining mature landscape. So the idea here is that it's not going to be all at once. We're not building a new home here. We're replacing and replenishing what's out there, and that phased approach should maintain that level of maturity through the landscape.
Plus, the new, younger material is healthier than what's in the ground.
And one thing you said, Mayor, that made me start thinking is that I've worked with Alan Curley on projects over the years from Oakland County, so I know him well. But I have contacts at the MEDC, and it's a stretch what I'm thinking right now, but they have a community development program that they can fund for grants. And it's to improve, they started with downtowns, but they did a lot with Midtown Detroit. I think they're doing a little bit with Northland. But it may be an opportunity to tie it to pure Michigan. Of course, when you talk about somebody from the airport coming in for that travel experience, maybe that's a selling point to use some of their money to match what the DDA is doing. So it's something I can look into. I know all the people up there, so I'll make some calls. They can say, well, no, we don't want you to do it. Troy has so much money, we're not going to even look at you. They did that at Auburn Hills when they did the downtown. They called it the Yellow Brick Road. But anyway, I won't get into that. So that's something that I'm going to explore, that I'll let Mark know what, we're not even going to consider it, or yeah, we'll come in and meet with you.
Great, thank you.
One more point to your comment, Mayor. I mean, through proper plant selection, through design that helps protect some of these species, I mean, the hope would be that we get more than 30 years out of this.
Sure.
And so I think what our arborist has identified is that there are some species that are failing due to, they really don't belong here. So I think if we're pretty selective about what that is, hopefully we can see a lot more life out of it than 30 years.
I don't think Chris really stressed how difficult and how stressful that environment really is. I mean, salt spray, snow wash, and then, Big Beaver's in a heat island, so in the middle of summer, it's really hot down there too. Plus, I mean, we barely can put enough water on it during the middle of the night because there's just so few zones. We can only put a moderate amount of water in those zones.
Also, I think when you look at a landscape, the trees will mature at a much different rate. So yeah, the trees may take 15 years to be mature, but the other woodies or the other plant material selections will be mature, far before that.
Hard question. The hard, that's an easy answer.
Yeah, the hardscape will obviously be mature when it goes in and it'll weather, but the trees will take some more time.
Thank you. Teresa, are you?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I just also want to reiterate the continuity, because we don't want the west side to look like a different city than the east side or something like that. So that's basically it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I used to serve on the DDA, as my colleagues know, and my workplace is right on Big Beaver, the Kresge Foundation, which also is a pitch, great native plants and trees.
Yeah.
So I do walk Big Beaver. I'm a runner. Sometimes I do my 6-mile run down Big Beaver to check on pedestrian safety. And I do have to say is whatever the numbers say, we do, of course, we have some work to do. But I know that we've had a focus on Move Troy, and I think that we can continue to focus on that. And to pivot, one question I wanted to ask is around kind of the 8-8 Big Beaver area, and it looked like there was a little orange node that's going to be an area you're going to focus on. And the reason being is, as we know, that there's talk of building out more of the development across 8-8 Big Beaver on the other side of Big Beaver. And that potentially we might have a bit of a natural kind of downtown feel that could potentially be created, through private development, just how it may develop if that goes forward on the other side of Big Beaver. And so for me, I'm really curious about that area. I'm curious of it in terms of course, the buffering that my colleague mentioned, and kind of, the attention that might be given to that. But it sounds like it is going to be a focus in an area that you're thinking. And you're talking, of course, I know you engage the developers, so you have a sense of what they're thinking.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have much to share on the treatment yet, but what I will say is that these nodes some of them are located to align with where potential mid-block crossings may be, and that's where one exists currently, is right here. So I think that's a huge opportunity to be able to put in landscape that's keyed not to just the vehicle scale, but the pedestrian scale is much more fine. So we can get, I think there's a lot of things we can do that would help those businesses through the landscaping effort.
And that's my thought, is as you analyze what are areas where there, as we engage, I know our planning director is here too, to think where might there be development that there could be more pedestrian activity, and therefore then there might be a different sort of necessity of a different kind of landscaping a little bit on it. So that's an area my eyes are on it. I think there could be exciting things down the future, and you might see, there might be, instead of we imagine the whole of Big Beaver as a place where people are engaging, maybe it's more sections of it. So that's just something that came to mind. The overall thing that struck me first, and I appreciate it, is the timeliness of the project. That it comes at a time where we have some of our pavers and areas where they need work. And so this is a time to really double down and think of a bigger strategy that could go out into the rest of the city. So I really appreciate that. Helps us to communicate to residents when they ask questions. And the second thing I wrote down was around those beautiful evergreens and the phasing and how we communicate that to residents, and that there are some diseased trees and all that, but the fact that you've already you thought of it, the phasing, and we just talked about that with the age and all that. I feel really confident that we'll be able to communicate to residents so they understand that. Other thing was, I just wanted to ask a little more about the placemaking. I know right now we're talking about placemaking as in just making things look nice, like improving our pavers and the buffering strategies and the landscaping. I also see it as, I wonder, as we add like maybe some benches in, because that encourages people to actually walk the area and stop. And if we choose areas where engaging our development director, where we think there could be more of a density and possibility for that, what further? Because I had this, remember when I had this funny question about the beavers, like we had these beavers in the city, and I had a resident who had an idea, like what if you still had the beavers? We don't, they were auctioned, good cause, and if you had them, choose that area, you could put like the beavers or something like that's, like a fun placemaking thing along, public, along our sidewalks, next to like benches and things, but wondering, is that also on our minds? And maybe that's more of a city staff
It's funny
thing.
that you mentioned.
Things like that.
We have funny you mentioned, we've thought about that, so part of our inventory is land that we own that's excess, and we own a piece of property right here, right in front of the DTE Apache substation, which we're thinking maybe we move the corporate head to that location, create a little Vest Pocket Park right there with benches and things. And we're starting to think over by Kresge,
Yes.
there's that large extra right-of-way that kind of looks funny because it's like 40 feet of lawn. That's another area which you can activate and do things like that. So that's in our thinking. We're not designing. You can talk about how we would end up thinking and implementing that.
Yeah.
down the road, but
we
just
are
the
thinking about
possibility. So, and that's what I think you get more people who want to walk when there's opportunity to sit, hang out. There's some street lights you string on there or something, and so it's very exciting. Last thing I wanted to ask was you know, wanting to just kind of ask the question, like, whatever you're proposing, I trust that it's something we know our staff, that there's capacity to maintain. So, you know, the worst thing is, you know, we don't want to dream big and feel like, you know, it's going to be a stretch to staff to have to take care of that. So I imagine that's something you're thinking about as
Yeah,
you tell us.
landscape maintenance is a huge focus for what we do, because it doesn't do anybody good if it looks good for one season and then it dies because we can't maintain it. And so it really is something that as we move forward, you know, we're going to be thinking about maintenance as we move forward, which is why some of these treatments are kind of attractive with some of the stone elements, because the maintenance required for some of these is maybe a lot less than what would be required for a perennial landscape. So,
And that can be a buffer too.
and it can be a buffer that helps protect. I mean, our folks were out there and they started their collection when the snow was still on the ground. And so as the plow trucks were coming through, not only was snow getting thrown all the way across the median, not just partway, but like all the way across. At the end of the day, you know, they're caked in salt. And that's stuff that we got to think about when we put in, is stuff that's going to take that salt, because that's not going to stop. So, absolutely, maintenance.
Yes, and I know our staff would 100%, 110% on it, just don't want it to be a stretch for folks. But
Kurt's keeping me alive.
overall, I'm just excited to keep doing my 6-mile runs down Big Beaver and see how it grows and develops. So thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks, Rebecca. Dave?
Maybe I'll do like a 10-minute run. Rebecca's an amazing runner. She always destroys me and the mayor when we do 5Ks, but no. I'm thinking a lot about our trails and pathways. It's funny, Mark, that you mentioned Auburn Hills, because I remember biking with my wife on the Clinton River Trail, and it's kind of cool how it kind of integrates with downtown Auburn Hills. So I'm wondering, Kurt does a lot with our Trails and Pathway program. Do we see a vision of maybe the Trails and Pathways integrating with Big Beaver at some point and kind of driving that traffic like that? I don't know if that's in the plan. I know that this is something we're slowly phasing out through the years, but it's just something, I don't really have a question on that, just a comment that maybe that could encourage more pedestrian usage, and if there are very attractive things along Big Beaver, that could drive kind of that integration. Another thing I've heard from some businesses along the corridor is, how will signage get integrated into all this? A lot of the businesses kind of tucked into parking lots and other areas, and they've kind of struggled, people getting lost. I heard from Granite City in particular, it is kind of hard to like get in there with the DEI there and everything. So how will that be integrated in? How will it thematically be integrated in to kind of look nice and, you know, together with the new landscaping? And then I think of a few years ago, before quite a few of the current council members were on here, we had a whole plan for new signs in Troy, and the mayor and others, we decided to do more work on that. But that's something that probably goes in line with this, that I'd like to see kind of coordinated together to make sure.
I say it all the time.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. Yeah, but it wasn't said yet. But I'd like to see that process synchronized with this as well, because they go hand in hand. That's all I got. But everything looks great. I'm really excited to see this, and I think it's going to be useful for our city.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is very thoughtful. I especially appreciated, although I'm sure birch trees are not practical, that up Northfield would be really cool, but just throwing that out there. We were talking about walkability. I want us also to focus on biking. We frequently hear from constituents that Troy's not a particularly bike-friendly place, but I think with our trail development and so forth, it could potentially somewhere down the road, so I'd like to see that being taken into consideration. Is there anything being done to try to moderate the traffic somehow? I mean, I know we're not really looking at like redoing the road itself, because I think the perception of Big Beaver as being unsafe is really a perception of it being unpleasant. You know, because I frankly, you know, I would love to walk down Big Beaver, but then I probably wouldn't love to walk down Big Beaver.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Which, can I ask, when you say moderate traffic, are you talking speeds? Are you talking volume?
Yeah, I mean, what I see Big Beaver is being used as a throughway. You know, and some of that traffic's local, but a lot of it is people just buzzing. You know, it's a good way to cut all the way through from Macomb County into Oakland County.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if you program a cross-country, or cross-county trip into your Waze, it's gonna likely take you down Big Beaver, because there's just no better way to get from Oakland to Macomb, usually. So,
Oh, sorry.
but, so I don't know if that's possible, if there's anything about what we're doing here that could discourage people from using it as a highway.
What I'll offer, and maybe Rhett, you have more work with our COC and can jump in, but as I understand it, the mandate is really that we're not looking to slow traffic down. We're not looking to control any of that, and anything we do really needs to be hands off from affecting those traffic patterns.
Okay.
That's my understanding from what our COCs talked about.
Yeah, formally. Right, okay. So, but we talk about, and we talked about this at the DDA meeting as well. When you start bringing pedestrian scale things to the corridor, whether it be pedestrian scale lighting, whether it be bringing back wayfinding for pedestrians, there's this intuitive feel that, okay, there's something around that's going to cause me, one, to look around and make sure, and I'm going to see more pedestrians, I'm going to slow down. It's human nature, right? Everyone wants everyone to be safe. So I think once we start bringing some of these pedestrian scale elements into the corridor, because the corridor was never designed for pedestrian feel. In fact, one of the things that surprises me most about this project is walking into these stakeholder engagements, having an idea that, okay, we're going to be told what flowers to plant and how it should look. And that was probably, no one has said that yet. It's all about how the corridor should feel and how the landscape should create that feeling. And all the stakeholders agree that there has to be better pedestrian elements. So I think taking that and then working it into our design will naturally slow traffic down and create a more comfortable corridor, and may actually dissuade someone from thinking, okay, I can get from Coolidge to DeQuinder in 4 minutes if I take Big Beaver, but now it may take 5 minutes, they may not use it as that cut through like we're used to seeing.
That's what I'm thinking. So that's, we don't even have jurisdiction over that road. We have limited ability to tell the county what to do with it. And plus, I think the roads in Macomb County actually help the traffic situation be damped down quite a bit. So, oh, I'm sorry, I said that with the out loud voice. Just take 16 past DeQuinder, you know exactly what I mean. I like the native plants, the idea of native plants. I like the idea of, we've been incorporating bioswale and other types of water management technology or designs in our parks and so forth. And I love that idea of continuing that in that area for sustainability. We're talking to stakeholders, which I get is mostly like the DDA businesses, because they have the most at stake, obviously. But are we able to, or have we reached out to, for instance, the people who might be the intended pedestrians, like people who work there, people who live there? Do we have that ability to reach out to them and get their feedback?
Yep, we had developed an online survey that we distributed to the stakeholders that we had met with, so they could then distribute that to some of their tenants.
Okay.
We didn't get a huge response, but we did get some folks that responded to that survey. So.
Can I also add, so when we met with Unicorp, the 888 development, they're more than 100 and so many units now in the Zen apartments. They talked a little bit about the residents and what they're feeling, and they're new to the area, but they did weigh in a little bit on that pedestrian experience from that perspective, and I think as we see residential, more units come to the area too, I think it's going to naturally drive some of that conversation. And we'll have a DDA.
Advisory board.
Yeah, right. We'll have a DDA, that board that will also weigh in a little bit as the process goes, because now we've got over 100 units there. So I think that will continue.
I like also I believe there's an element there to try to make the intersections safer. You mentioned Frogger and so forth, and that would be a main reason why I wouldn't do a whole lot of walking in Big Beaver, at least not in terms if I wanted to cross it right now, because I would be afraid that my age and mobility getting across Big Beaver might be an issue. So I think that will be very helpful to try to come up with ways to make it better to, because if you can't cross the road, you know, it's not
Right.
really truly walkable
Absolutely.
or bikeable. Bikeable, I know my daughter tells me the horror stories that keep me up at night about when she's riding her bike around town. So, oh, and then I think the last thing was, we talked about, you know, the phasing, and I think the word was like endpoint, and the thing that caught to my mind was, are we thinking way down the road to have like a more continual sort of look at this? Because it just looking back at these various plans before, it looks like we look at it, we do something, and then, you know, then the trees start dying, and then we start thinking about it. So I'm thinking, do we have the ability to put in motion a more continual plan that would, you know, obviously continual to 2033 when the DDA sunsets, but instead of like a plan for the next 5 to 7 years, could we think about a plan for the next 20 to 30 years? Just a thought. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Ed. We're over time in a sense, so I'll wrap. We've got another meeting coming up, but I guess, Mark, I'll say, seems like you have good input that we're moving in the right direction,
Yes.
right? That was the takeaway. I've got to take this opportunity. Those signs that are around the city that have the old logo that are faded that we can't read, it's an embarrassment to this city. And I know that we're talking about the DDA, but I think we should either look at taking those down and replacing them with temporary something, but we've got the signs of yesterday today. Yes. So, I mean, it's...
We don't want tomorrow.
It's not... we focus so much on promoting a good image in the city of Troy. It's good for our residents and schools and businesses, and that is like our perimeter surrounded by something that isn't befitting of what our city should be. So I know it's all about resources and money, but I hope there's, it seems I'm nodding heads, if we can maybe look at that project sooner rather than later. Finally got the opportunity to get consensus for that. So there we go. Chris and OHM and Rhett, thank you for this great presentation. I think it really highlighted a lot of good work. There's been a lot of other stuff that isn't part of this presentation, and touching on a lot of things everyone's asked questions about especially. But the work continues, and I really appreciate it. And
Absolutely. Appreciate everyone's input.
that's it. So we'll adjourn so we can get ready for our other meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.